Story 1. The Hunter Who Never Came Back. Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with your friends. And don't forget to drop a comment below. Tell me which country you're watching from, and what time it is right now where you are. I'll be reading through them all. Now, let's step into the darkness. They say Montana's Bitterroot Forest is one of the most beautiful places in America. But what if I told you it's also one of the most dangerous? Not because of bears, not because of wolves, but because people walk in and never come out. In 1994, a hunter named Danny Collins vanished deep in those woods. All that was found was his camp and a single message carved into a tree, 2 words that still haunt this forest to this day. It watches me. And since then, the disappearances have never stopped. The story I'm about to tell you comes from the far reaches of Montana, where the forests stretch so wide and so deep that you can walk for days without seeing another human being. Locals talk about strange things out there, whispers in the trees, shadows that move when the wind is still, and the feeling that you're never truly alone. But this story isn't just a campfire tale. It's based on an incident that's been whispered around small towns and hunting communities for years, about a man who went missing in the woods, under circumstances no one has ever been able to explain. It was the fall of 1994. 39-year-old Danny Collins was an experienced hunter. Born and raised in Montana, he knew the land better than most. He'd been venturing into the forest since he was a teenager, always returning with game and stories of close encounters with bears and wolves. But Danny wasn't reckless. Everyone agreed. He respected the woods. He followed the rules. That's what makes his disappearance so unsettling. On October 12th, Danny told his wife, Carla, that he'd be heading out for a 3-day solo hunting trip in the Bitterroot National Forest. It wasn't unusual for him. He loved the solitude of the wilderness. He packed his rifle, camping gear, a small supply of food, and his compass. He left early in the morning, driving his old Chevy pickup into the timber roads until he couldn't go any further. When Danny didn't return on the 15th, Carla assumed he'd just gotten delayed. But by the 16th, she contacted the authorities. That's when the search began, and when the strange details started piling up. Search teams combed the woods. They found Danny's truck, locked and untouched, at the trailhead. Nearby, they found boot prints leading into the forest. Search dogs followed the trail for nearly 2 miles, before abruptly stopping, as if Danny had simply vanished. Then came the first disturbing discovery: his camp. Danny had clearly set up his tent and built a small fire ring, but the fire was cold, the tent was still zipped up, and his belongings, including his rifle, were neatly inside. It looked as if he had stepped away for just a moment and never returned. But here's the part that haunted the searchers the most. About 50 yards from the tent, carved deep into the bark of a tree, were 3 words, written in a shaky hand: "It watches me." At first, searchers thought maybe it was a prank or even vandalism from someone else, but handwriting experts later compared it to samples from Danny's personal journals. They said it was almost certainly his. But what did it mean? The official search went on for 2 weeks. No body was ever found. No further trace of Danny was ever recovered. Officially, he's listed as missing to this day. But over the years, rumors started to circulate. Stories from other hunters and hikers who swore they'd seen or heard things in the same stretch of forest. Some said they'd felt followed for miles, only to turn and find nothing there. Others described hearing low growls that seemed to circle them, always just out of sight. And one witness, a hunter named Carl Jensen, gave a chilling account. He claimed that one evening, while camping not far from where Danny's tent was found, he saw a figure standing at the tree line. At first, he thought it was a man. But then, as he stared, he realized its proportions were all wrong. Too tall, too thin. Its limbs looked stretched, elongated, like a shadow that had stepped out of place. When Carl reached for his flashlight, the figure melted back into the trees without a sound. Carl refused to ever return to those woods again. Danny Collins' disappearance is still talked about in Montana to this day. Some say he got lost, others say it was a bear or a mountain lion. But for those who know the land, the ones who felt that same unsettling presence, they believe something else is out there. Something that watches, something that waits, and something that may have taken Danny Collins, The hunter who never came back. After the official search ended, the case of Danny Collins became just another file in the sheriff's office, another name on the long list of missing persons in Montana's wilderness. But to the people who lived near the Bitterroot National Forest, the story didn't end there. In fact, for many, it was only the beginning. A few weeks after the search was called off, locals began whispering about a series of strange sightings. One hiker claimed he saw a flashlight flickering deep in the trees, far off the trail in the dead of night. But when he called out, the light went out instantly. Another swore he heard gunshots echoing faintly through the valley, but when searchers went to investigate, they found nothing. No footprints, no casings, no signs of anyone firing a rifle. Perhaps the most unsettling was a camper who said that as he dozed off by his fire, he heard someone whisper his name, his actual name, from just beyond the tree line. These stories might have been dismissed as campfire tales, except for one thing. Each of these sightings happened within a few miles of where Danny's camp was discovered. Carla, Danny's wife, never accepted the official explanation. She believed something had happened, something beyond a simple accident. She started speaking with other hunters, rangers, even tribal elders from the nearby Salish community. That's when she heard the word for the first time. The Tall One. The Salish people had their own stories about the Bitterroot Forest. For generations, elders had warned against traveling too deep into certain valleys. They spoke of a being that lived among the trees, a figure that was not animal, not man, but something in between. It was said to stalk travelers silently, appearing only when you were alone. Sometimes it showed itself as a shadow, sometimes as a man-shaped figure with unnaturally long arms and legs, and sometimes people simply vanished, leaving no trace behind. Carla asked one elder if this was what had taken her husband. The old man just shook his head and said, "It doesn't take people. It waits. And when you notice it, it's already too late." Meanwhile, new evidence surfaced that only deepened the mystery. A search volunteer, while exploring a ridgeline a few miles from Danny's camp, stumbled across something carved into a tree trunk. It looked like words, scratched roughly into the bark. It read, "Still watching." Authorities dismissed it as a hoax, likely carved by teenagers after hearing the rumors. But handwriting analysts noted a disturbing similarity between the carving and Danny's note at his camp. If true, it suggested he'd survived longer than anyone thought, that he had been out there, moving through the woods, leaving behind warnings, until he couldn't anymore. The final piece of the puzzle came from a man named Earl Peterson, a retired logger. Earl claimed that years earlier, in the exact same stretch of forest, he and his crew had seen something unexplainable. While felling trees, one of the workers spotted what he thought was a man standing at the edge of the clearing. When they called out, the figure didn't move. It just stood there, completely still. Curious, one of the men walked toward it, but after taking only a few steps, he froze. From where he stood, he realized the figure wasn't standing on the ground at all. It was several feet above it, as if hanging in the air. The men fled the site immediately. Earl swore he never went back. Stories like these might sound unbelievable, but in the Bitterroot, they're part of a much bigger pattern. A pattern of people going missing, a pattern of strange sightings, and a pattern of something that seems to be watching, always watching, from just beyond the trees. 1 year later, in the fall of 1995, another hunter disappeared in almost the same location. His name was Aaron Miller. He was younger than Danny, only 25, but like Danny, he knew the woods well. Aaron had recently bought a new camcorder. This was the mid-90s, remember, and he brought it with him on his hunting trip, hoping to record some of his adventures. He never returned. Weeks later, his backpack was found leaning against a tree. Inside was his camcorder. The tape inside had only a few minutes of usable footage, but what it showed has haunted everyone who's seen it. The video begins with Aaron speaking casually into the camera, showing his camp, his rifle, and joking about hoping to bag a deer. The sun is setting and he pans across the tree line. For a moment, nothing seems unusual. But if you pause at the right second, there's something in the background. A shape. A tall, thin figure almost blending into the trees. Aaron doesn't seem to notice it at first, but later in the video, his tone changes. He whispers into the camera, saying he feels like he's being followed. He says he keeps hearing footsteps behind him, but when he turns, nothing is there. The final moments of the tape are the most disturbing. It's dark. Aaron is breathing heavily, the camera shaking as he films himself moving quickly through the woods. He whispers, "It's behind me." Then there's a sudden noise, branches snapping, something large moving fast. Aaron spins the camera around, and for less than a second, a face appears in the beam of his flashlight. But it isn't human. The tape cuts off there. When investigators examined the area, they found no body, no sign of a struggle, no blood. Just the backpack, propped neatly against the tree, as if placed there on purpose. After Aaron's disappearance, the stories about the Bitterroot National Forest spread further. Local outfitters began warning tourists not to travel alone. Some even refused to guide hunters into certain valleys. And yet, the disappearances didn't stop. By the early 2000s, more than a dozen people had vanished in and around the same area. Most were written off as accidents, people getting lost, falling into ravines, or encountering predators. But locals whispered another explanation. They said the forest was hunting them. Carla Collins, Danny's wife, became obsessed. She spent years gathering every story she could. She mapped disappearances, compiled interviews, even kept copies of Aaron Miller's tape. Some people called her crazy. Others said she was the only one telling the truth. One night, during a town hall meeting about search and rescue funding, Carla stood up and told everyone, "We keep sending people in, and the forest keeps taking them. This isn't nature, this isn't chance. Something is out there and it knows we're here." The room fell silent. After that, she stopped speaking publicly, but those who knew her best said she continued to investigate in private until her death in 2010. Her final journal entry, found by her daughter, contained only 4 words: "I saw it too." Since then, the Bitterroot has continued to build its reputation as one of the strangest, most unsettling forests in America. Some hikers describe feeling watched the moment they step off the trail. Others say they've seen shadowy figures move between trees. And every few years, another person goes missing. Officially, the cases remain unsolved, but unofficially, the locals know the truth. They say that once you notice it, once you see the figure watching you, it's already too late. That's what happened to Danny Collins. That's what happened to Aaron Miller. And if you ever find yourself in the Bitterroot and you feel that unmistakable chill run down your spine, you'll know it's happening to you too. Because in those woods, there's something that waits. And it never stops watching. Years passed, and the Bitterroot Forest's reputation only grew darker. It became a place hunters mentioned in hushed tones, a location rangers warned newcomers about. But despite the warnings, people kept going in, and some never returned. In 2008, a pair of college students from Missoula decided to camp near the same ridge where Danny Collins's camp had been found. Their names were Brian and Eric, both 21. They weren't experienced woodsmen, but they wanted an adventure. They never came home. Searchers later found their tent torn down, their supplies scattered. But it wasn't animals that had destroyed the camp. There were no claw marks, no signs of teeth. Instead, it looked deliberate, like someone had rifled through their gear and thrown it across the clearing. The strangest detail was the camera. They had brought along a small digital camera to document their trip. It was found lying in the dirt, its battery dead, but the memory card intact. When investigators viewed the pictures, most were ordinary shots of the forest, of the boys smiling with their tent, of the sunset. But the final 3 photos chilled them to the bone. The first was taken at night. It showed the 2 boys sitting by the fire grinning. In the background between 2 trees was something tall and thin, just barely visible in the shadows. The second was blurry, as if taken in a rush. It showed the same clearing, but the fire was out. A faint figure could be seen much closer to the camera now. The third photo was pure black, as if the lens had been covered. But when the brightness was digitally enhanced, investigators noticed 2 faint white shapes near the bottom of the frame. They weren't reflections. They looked like eyes. Nothing else was found. By now, even law enforcement couldn't deny the pattern. Sheriff's deputies, forest rangers, and volunteer searchers began refusing to return to certain areas. Some openly admitted they were afraid. One ranger, speaking anonymously, gave an interview to a local paper. He said, "It's not bears, it's not cougars. I've tracked animals my whole life, I know the signs, but out there's something else. I've seen footprints that don't match anything. I've heard voices when no one's around. Once I even saw a figure step behind a tree, but it never came out the other side. I waited 5 minutes. Nothing, it just vanished." After that interview, the ranger resigned and moved out of state. Still, the stories continued. A hunter named James, who survived his own encounter, gave perhaps the most chilling testimony. In 2014, he was tracking elk in the Bitterroot when he realized he'd strayed too far from the trail. Night was falling, and he decided to make camp rather than risk stumbling in the dark. Around midnight, he woke to the sound of footsteps circling his tent. Slow, deliberate, crunching in the pine needles. He called out, assuming it was another hunter, maybe even a lost hiker. But no voice answered. The footsteps stopped. Then, without warning, the fabric of his tent pressed inward, as if someone was leaning against it, pushing their face toward him from the outside. Terrified, James grabbed his rifle and fired blindly through the tent wall. The sound echoed through the forest. When he scrambled outside, the clearing was empty, but his tent now had a large hole torn through it, and in the dirt, just a few feet away, was a single footprint. But it wasn't shaped like a boot, or even a bare human foot. It was elongated, impossibly narrow, with claw-like impressions at the tips. James ran all night until he found the road. He never went back. The legend of the Bitterroot continued to spread, no longer just in Montana but across the country. Paranormal investigators, amateur YouTubers, even documentary crews began flocking to the area, hoping to capture evidence. Most left empty-handed, but a few claimed success. One video uploaded anonymously in 2017 shows two men exploring a ravine at dusk. For the first few minutes, the footage is uneventful, just forest, rocks, and banter between the men. But at the 5-minute mark, one of them suddenly stops. He points toward the tree line. The camera zooms in, and for less than a second, a dark figure can be seen slipping behind a pine. When the men approach, there's nothing there. But the most disturbing part of the video isn't the figure at all. It's the sound. When the audio is enhanced, faintly, under the rustle of the trees, you can hear something. A whisper. It says, "Still watching." The same words Danny Collins carved into the tree over 2 decades earlier. By now, the Bitterroot has earned comparisons to other infamous window areas, places like the Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts or the missing 411 cases in national parks. Skeptics dismiss the stories as urban legends, fueled by fear and coincidence. But believers argue that the forest itself is a predator, that it hides something older than man, something that waits, patiently, for its next victim. And the most chilling thought of all? What if the missing aren't really gone? What if they're still out there, trapped in the trees, watched forever by the thing that took them? Legends fade with time. Stories get twisted, exaggerated, forgotten. But in the Bitterroot National Forest, the legend of Danny Collins has only grown darker. Because every year, without fail, someone claims to see him. In 2021, a group of hunters from Idaho camped near the edge of the restricted zone. They weren't aware of the forest's reputation. The first night, one of them stepped away from the fire. When he returned, his face was pale. He said he'd seen a man watching him from the tree line. When pressed to describe him, he whispered, "Like a hunter, dressed in old gear, but his face, it wasn't right." The others laughed it off. Until morning. That's when they found a tree near their camp. Carved into its bark were the words, "It watches me." The same words Danny had carved before his disappearance. The following year, a backpacker exploring deep in the forest reported finding a rusted rifle leaning against a fallen log. Curious, he jotted down the serial number and later gave it to authorities. The number matched a rifle registered to Danny Collins in 1994. When asked why he didn't bring it back, the backpacker admitted something chilling. He said the moment he touched it, he heard a whisper, a single word: run. Today, the Bitterroot remains one of America's most mysterious forests. Rangers avoid certain trails. Locals tell newcomers never to hike alone. And yet, the disappearances continue. The official records list accidents, predators, poor navigation. But off the record, everyone knows the truth. They know that something still moves in those trees. Some say it's not Danny anymore. Not really. That the forest twisted him, claimed him, made him part of itself. Others believe he's still out there, wandering endlessly, trying to warn people before it's too late. Whatever the truth is, one thing is certain. The Bitterroot is still watching. And if you ever find yourself there deep in the Montana wilderness, and you feel that icy shiver at the back of your neck, remember Danny's final words. It watches me. Because in those woods, it still does.